There are moments in life that change everything you thought you knew. For me, that moment came during my husband's funeral service in the darkest minutes of my grief. As I sit here now telling you this story, every detail feels as fresh as if it happened yesterday. The pain, the confusion, the impossible joy that followed, it's all still vivid in my heart. I've decided to share this story not because I'm looking for sympathy, but because I believe it needs to be told. Because there are people out there going through similar situations who need to know that life has a way of surprising us, even in our darkest hours. Even when we think we've reached the end of the road. My name is Clara, and this is the story that shattered everything I believed about death, about marriage, and about life itself. It's a story I've kept secret for over a year now, and telling it feels like opening a door I've kept locked tight in my heart. But I'm ready now. I'm ready to let the world know what happened on that terrible and beautiful day. I met Robert on the crowded streets of New York when we were young and hopeful. It was 1979, and I was walking to my apartment after a particularly difficult day at school. One of my students had gotten into trouble, and I'd spent the afternoon arguing with his parents, trying to convince them that their son wasn't a lost cause. I was frustrated, tired, and lost in my own thoughts. Robert literally walked into me. Not on purpose, of course. He was so focused on the newspaper he was reading while walking that he didn't see me standing at the corner. We both fell. My books scattered everywhere. My carefully organized lesson plans went flying into the street. And Robert, instead of apologizing quickly and moving on, sat down right there on the sidewalk and helped me gather everything. He asked me about my day. He asked me about my life. He asked me questions that made me feel like my answers actually mattered to someone. That was Robert. He was a newspaper reporter who believed that every story was worth telling, every person was worth listening to, and every moment was worth documenting. He had this incredible way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the world, like your life was the headline he'd been waiting to write. He was a newspaper reporter. I was a teacher. One of life's greatest blessings is spending decades with someone who truly understands you. Robert would listen to my stories for hours. Stories about my students, about my struggles at work, about the little moments that made up my days. He listened as if each story mattered more than anything in the world. And to him they did. I remember the first time he met my class. I was nervous. I didn't know how he'd react to all these teenagers, all this chaos and energy and youth. But he was extraordinary. He talked to every single student. He asked them about their dreams. He listened to their stories like they were the most important interviews he'd ever conducted. One student, Tommy, was a troublemaker. He'd been kicked out of his previous 2 schools. Everyone had written him off. But Robert saw something in him, some spark, some potential. He started coming by the school, talking to Tommy, encouraging him to write. 5 years later, Tommy published his first short story in a magazine. He told me it was because of Robert's belief in him. That was our life together. Robert believed in people. He saw the good in them, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. And he believed in me with a kind of certainty that made me believe in myself. Marriage isn't a fairy tale, though. Yes, there are beautiful moments, but there are also difficulties that no one prepares you for. Like every couple, we experienced ups and downs that would test everything we thought we knew about love and commitment. Some years we barely spoke to each other. We'd sit in the same room in complete silence, lost in our own worlds. He'd be absorbed in his work, stressed about a story he couldn't quite get right. I'd be grading papers or thinking about a student who wasn't progressing the way I'd hoped. There were years when we fought about money. We never had enough. There were years when we wanted children and couldn't have them, and that grief created a distance between us that took a long time to bridge. There were years when we wondered if we'd made a terrible mistake, if we should have chosen different paths, different partners, different lives. But through it all, we were there. Even when Robert didn't need a reason to say, "I love you," he did. He looked at me with the eyes of someone who chose me, every single day for 45 years. And I chose him right back. When we first got married, We lived in a tiny apartment in Manhattan that cost most of our combined salary. The walls were paper thin. We could hear our neighbors arguing, laughing, having conversations through the walls. The kitchen was so small that Robert and I couldn't both be in it at the same time. We had to coordinate our movements like a dance. But we loved it. We loved it because it was ours, because we were building something together. Robert was ambitious in those early years. He wanted to be the best reporter at the newspaper. He'd come home with stories about the things he'd witnessed, the people he'd interviewed. He'd tell me about a homeless man who'd once been a professor, about a woman who'd worked 3 jobs to put her children through college, about the hidden dramas that played out on the streets of New York every single day. He saw the world as a collection of stories, and he wanted to tell all of them. I was ambitious too, in my own way. I wanted to be the teacher who made a difference. I stayed late at school, worked with struggling students, called parents, went to their homes sometimes to understand their situations better. I wanted every child in my classroom to feel seen, to feel like their potential mattered. We were young and idealistic, and we thought we could change the world. We thought our love could conquer anything. We didn't understand yet that life would throw complications at us that couldn't be solved with passion and determination alone. By our 20-year mark, things had shifted. Robert had become a respected journalist, not famous, but well-known in certain circles. He'd covered major stories. He'd won awards. But the work was consuming him. He'd come home exhausted, sometimes angry, frustrated by the limitations of journalism, by the stories that never got told, by the people he couldn't help. I'd stopped teaching full-time. We'd wanted to travel, to have more flexibility, to enjoy the success Robert had achieved. But I'd started substitute teaching instead, which gave me more freedom, but also made me feel like I'd abandoned my real calling. I felt like a failure in some ways, even though Robert never made me feel that way. This is the period I think about a lot now. This is when we should have talked more, should have been more present with each other. Instead, we let life sweep us along. We went to work, came home, ate dinner in front of the television, went to bed, and repeated the cycle. We loved each other, but we weren't really living together anymore. We were just existing in the same space. Our retirement years felt like a second chance. We had the freedom we'd always dreamed of. We traveled to places we'd always wanted to see. We spent a summer in Italy, renting a small villa in Tuscany. We drove along the Amalfi Coast. We sat in cafes and watched the world go by. For the first time in years, we seemed to remember why we'd fallen in love in the first place. We traveled to Ireland and walked through the countryside. We went to Greece and watched the sunset from Santorini. We visited Paris and spent hours in the Louvre, arguing about which paintings we loved most. Robert would read the history of each place, sharing details with me about the artists and the time periods and the political situations. I'd hold his hand and listen, grateful that even after all these years, he could still make me see the world through new eyes. We became comfortable in our routines, comfortable in the silence that sometimes filled our home. We'd spend quiet mornings on our porch, watching the world wake up. Robert would read the newspaper, Old Habits Die Hard, and I would grade papers from my occasional substitute teaching or lose myself in a book. We had our favorite coffee shop where they knew our order by heart. We had our favorite restaurants. We had our favorite walking route through Central Park. But life has a way of throwing unexpected things your way, doesn't it? 3 years ago, Robert started forgetting things. At first, it was small, where he put his reading glasses, what we ate for dinner last night. I didn't worry. We all forget things. Getting older means your memory isn't what it used to be. That's just part of the natural process of aging. But then it got worse. He'd repeat the same stories, sometimes 3 times in a single evening. He'd ask me the same question and forget he'd asked it minutes before. I remember one evening specifically. We were watching the news, and a story came on about a journalist who'd won a prestigious award. Robert turned to me and said, "That should have been me. I could have done that kind of work." I nodded and listened to him talk about the story for 20 minutes. Then a commercial came on. The news returned, and when the same story came back up, Robert turned to me with the exact same comment. That should have been me. I could have done that kind of work. The third time it happened, within the same hour, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't normal forgetfulness. This was something else. I took him to the doctor. We sat in that sterile waiting room, and I told the physician assistant about the incidents. Robert denied most of them, which made it harder. He insisted his memory was fine, that he was just tired, that he'd had a lot on his mind. The doctor ordered tests. We had to wait 2 weeks for the results. The word they used was Alzheimer's. I remember sitting in that office, holding Robert's hand, while the doctor explained what was coming. The slow fade, the loss of memory, the gradual disappearance of the person you love most. The doctor showed us statistics, explained the progression, talked about medication options that might slow the decline but wouldn't stop it. He talked about assisted living facilities. He talked about the reality that eventually Robert might not remember me at all. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them they were wrong, that Robert was fine, that this wasn't happening to us. But his hand was trembling in mine, and I knew it was true. I could feel it. Somehow I'd known something was wrong for weeks. My body had sensed it before my mind could accept it. Over the next 3 years, I watched the man I loved slowly disappear. It's the cruelest disease because they're still there, but they're not. He'd look at me sometimes with confusion in his eyes, as if trying to remember who I was. Other times, he'd recognize me and smile. That familiar smile that made me fall in love with him all over again, every single time. But those moments of recognition became rarer and rarer. I'd show him pictures from our past. "This is us on our honeymoon," I'd say, pointing to a photo of us in Vermont, both impossibly young, both impossibly happy. He'd look at the photo with polite interest, like I was showing him pictures of strangers. "That's nice," he'd say with no emotion in his voice. "That's very nice." The medication didn't work the way the doctor said it might. Robert's decline was faster than average. Within 2 years, he didn't recognize most of our family. Within 2.5 years, he mostly didn't recognize me, though there were still moments, rare, precious moments, when something would trigger a memory, and he'd suddenly look at me with recognition and say my name. The secret I kept hidden during those 3 years was that I was dying too. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Every day was a goodbye. Every moment was borrowed time. I took care of him, the meals, the medications, the late-night confusion when he'd wake up frightened, not knowing where he was, not knowing who I was, not understanding why a stranger was trying to get him back into bed. There were nights when he'd become aggressive, when the disease would transform him into someone I didn't recognize. He'd shout at me, push me away, ask me who I was and what I wanted from him. I'd stand there and take it because what else could I do? I'd call the nurse line and they'd tell me it was normal, that sundowning was a common symptom, that I just had to be patient. I did it because I loved him. But I also did it because I had to. There was no one else. Our children offered to help, to move us to a facility where he could get proper care. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't abandon him, even though part of me was dying a little bit every single day. There was one period that was particularly difficult. Robert had stopped eating. The doctor said this was a sign that we were in the final stages. He'd lost so much weight that I could see his bones through his skin. His hands, which had typed thousands of stories, which had held mine for 45 years, became fragile as bird bones. I sat with him every day, trying to coax him to eat something, anything. I'd prepare his favorite foods from our early marriage, the dishes I'd learned to make when we were first together, and I was trying to impress him. He'd look at the food with no recognition, no interest. He'd push it away gently, like he was apologizing for not being able to want it. I remember one afternoon, I was sitting on the edge of his bed and he looked at me with those confused eyes. And he said, "I'm sorry." Just like that. "I'm sorry." I asked him what he was sorry for, but he didn't answer. He'd already retreated back into whatever fog his mind was lost in. But I understood. He was sorry for leaving me. He was sorry for the disease. He was sorry for being a burden. I held him and cried. I told him he had nothing to be sorry for. But I think in that moment, something shifted inside me too. I was exhausted. I was grieving someone who was still alive. I was ready for this to be over, which made me feel guilty because wanting it to be over meant I wanted him to die. Last March, Robert caught pneumonia. His weak body couldn't fight it off. The doctor said his heart was failing, that his kidneys were shutting down. They gave us the timeline, days, maybe a week at most. I had to make decisions about whether to hospitalize him, whether to do resuscitation if his heart stopped, whether to use feeding tubes. These were conversations I'd never wanted to have. I chose to keep him home. I hired a hospice nurse who came during the day. She was kind and professional, and she explained to me what would happen. She told me the signs to watch for, the stages of the dying process. She made it clear that this was the end. My children came. We sat by his bedside. I talked to Robert even though I wasn't sure he could hear me. I told him it was okay to let go. I told him I loved him. I told him about our life together. I told him about the day we met. I told him about our honeymoon in Vermont when we got caught in a snowstorm and had to spend 3 extra days in a tiny cabin with nothing but a fireplace and each other. I told him about the time he came to my classroom and won over the most difficult student I'd ever taught. I told him about the trips we'd taken, the meals we'd shared, the ordinary days that had added up to a life. On a Tuesday morning, he died peacefully in his sleep. I was holding his hand when it happened. One moment he was breathing, shallow breaths that barely moved his chest. The next, silence. A silence so profound it felt like the end of the world. The silence of finality, of closure, of the absolute certainty that he was gone. I didn't scream or cry. I just sat there holding his hand, which was already growing cold. I sat there for an hour, maybe more. I just sat with his body and the terrible reality that this was really happening, that my husband of 45 years was really gone. They say funerals are for the living, not the dead. I understand that now. The funeral home was packed with people. Family members I hadn't seen in years, colleagues from Robert's old job, neighbors, friends, and so many former students of mine. Some of his old colleagues from the newspaper came. They shared stories about Robert, about the stories he'd broken, about his integrity as a journalist, about the way he'd mentored younger reporters. Everyone wanted to pay their respects, to tell me how much Robert meant to them, how much I meant to them. There were so many people that the funeral home asked if we could extend the visiting hours. I stood there in that room, greeting person after person, thanking them for coming, listening to their stories about Robert's impact on their lives. I wore black, of course. A simple black dress that I'd bought years ago for a distant relative's funeral. The dress felt wrong somehow, too formal, too theatrical for this occasion. I felt like I was wearing a costume, playing the role of the grieving widow. My daughter had flown in from California, my son from Boston. My grandchildren were there, dressed in their finest clothes, looking uncomfortable the way children do at funerals. They didn't understand death yet. They didn't understand that the world was ending for me. The funeral service was held at the church where Robert and I had gotten married 45 years earlier. The priest who conducted the service was someone we knew, someone Robert had interviewed years ago for a story. He said beautiful things about Robert's life, about his integrity as a journalist, about his dedication to his family, about his quiet strength, about the way he'd made people feel like their stories mattered. People cried. Some cried quietly, wiping away tears with tissues. Others sobbed openly, overcome with emotion. I stood there, numb, feeling like I was watching someone else's funeral, not my own husband's. I kept waiting to feel something. Overwhelming grief, anger, despair, but all I felt was this hollow emptiness, like someone had scooped out my insides and left me as a shell. After the service, we went to the cemetery. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day Robert would have appreciated. Sunshine, blue sky, a gentle breeze. The kind of day that makes you angry because it's beautiful and your husband is dead. There's something obscene about funeral days being nice. It should rain. There should be thunder and lightning and darkness to match what you're feeling inside. I watched them lower his casket into the ground. I heard the sound of dirt hitting the wooden box. I felt my daughter's hand slip into mine, her own hand trembling. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, but I didn't believe that, so I said nothing. The reception was held at the church afterwards. People were eating sandwiches and drinking coffee and sharing memories. Some of Robert's old colleagues were talking about a particularly famous story he'd covered in the 80s. My friend Margaret was telling people about the time Robert and I went to Paris and got completely lost trying to find a specific cafe he'd read about in a guidebook. Everyone laughed. Robert's sister was showing people photos of Robert as a child, as a young man, as a new reporter. I stood apart from all of it, feeling disconnected from the proceedings. It was during this reception, when people were eating and talking and remembering, that I stepped outside for a moment of peace. I needed to get away from the noise, away from all the well-meaning people who kept trying to make me talk about my feelings. The New York sun felt warm on my face, almost accusatory in its warmth. The noise of the city seemed far away, muted, like I was underwater and listening to the world from a distance. I was trying to remember how to breathe, how to exist in a world where Robert no longer existed. How to move forward when it felt like my entire reason for moving had been taken away. I was thinking about the 45 years we'd spent together, all the moments that had led to this moment, this day of finality. That's when my phone buzzed. At first, I didn't think much of it. Messages had been coming all day. Condolences from friends and family, people I hadn't heard from in years sending their sympathies. I'd been responding mechanically, thanking them for coming, thanking them for their words, their support, their presence. I knew I'd have to respond to hundreds of messages in the coming days and weeks. I pulled out my phone, thinking it was probably another, "I'm so sorry for your loss" text that I'd have to respond to later, when I had the strength to type out platitudes to people I barely remembered. But the message wasn't from an unknown number. It was from Robert's phone. My hand started shaking immediately. This couldn't be real. Someone must have borrowed his phone. Someone was playing a cruel joke at the worst possible time. Someone wanted to hurt me. I must have misread the name. It couldn't be from Robert because Robert was dead. I'd held his hand when he died. I'd seen his body at the funeral home. I'd just watched them put his casket in the ground. But there it was. The message was definitely from Robert's number. With trembling fingers, I opened the message. It said, "I am alive. Clara, I am alive. Don't mourn me. I'm still here." I must have read those words 50 times, maybe more. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst right there on the church lawn. My vision seemed to narrow and expand at the same time. I am alive, but that wasn't possible. That couldn't possibly be real. I'd been with him when he died. I'd felt him leave. I'd watched them place his body in a casket. I'd just heard them lower him into the ground. I'd thrown a handful of dirt on top of that casket myself. I looked around to see if someone was watching me, if this was some kind of cruel prank orchestrated by someone I knew. But everyone was inside, talking, eating, remembering. No one was outside with me. No one could see my face falling apart, see me staring at my phone like it held the secrets of the universe. I typed back with shaking fingers, "Robert? Is this really you? Please tell me this is really you." The response came within seconds, which was impossible. If this was Robert, if Robert was alive, how could he be responding so quickly? "It's me. I needed you to know. I needed you to understand that I'm not gone." Not really. I had to sit down. I found a bench a distance away from the church and sat down hard, my legs no longer able to support my weight. This was a hallucination. I was having a nervous breakdown. The stress and grief had finally broken something in my mind, and now I was communicating with dead people via text message. That was more likely than any other explanation. But I kept texting. "Where are you? How is this possible? I held your hand when you died. I know. I was there. I felt you holding my hand. I heard you saying goodbye to me. This doesn't make any sense. I know it doesn't. I'm going to explain everything. But I need you to trust me. I need you to listen to what I'm about to tell you without judgment. Over the next hour, sitting on that bench outside the church while my family was inside eating casserole, Robert explained to me what had happened. And with each message, I understood a little bit more, though the full picture didn't make sense until much later. His Alzheimer's, he wrote, had given him an unexpected gift in his final months. In the confusion of his deteriorating mind, he'd experienced something he couldn't fully explain. A kind of double consciousness. Part of him was losing his memory. Yes, but another part of him, the deeper part, the essential part of who he was becoming more aware, more alive than he'd ever been. He said that in the fog of his disease, he'd found clarity. He'd realized something that he'd been trying to tell me for months, but he'd lacked the words, lacked the ability to communicate properly. He realized that keeping him alive was killing me. Every day was a goodbye for me. Every day I was mourning him while he was still technically breathing. He told me he'd planned this months ago, in one of his lucid moments. He'd arranged everything with Thomas, his closest friend from his newspaper days, someone he'd known since they were both young reporters. Thomas had connections, Robert explained. Thomas had resources. Thomas had been willing to help because he loved Robert and he understood the situation. This is where the story gets difficult to explain, because it involves things that were probably illegal, things that involve deception and manipulation of records and people I didn't know and systems I didn't understand. Robert had switched places with someone who had just died, someone from a nearby hospital who had no family to claim the body, someone whose death would go unnoticed, whose family was scattered and unlikely to request specific details. It was arranged through Thomas's connections, through favors owed, through a system of underground connections I didn't fully understand and didn't want to understand. The man who was buried in Robert's casket was not my husband. When I read those words on my phone, I felt the world shift. I felt reality reorganize itself. I felt like I was losing my mind. Why? I typed back, my fingers barely able to hit the right keys. Why would you do this? His response took longer this time. I could almost see him, wherever he was, trying to figure out how to explain something that had no easy explanation. Because I realized I was watching you die while staying alive. Every day I saw you fade a little bit more. I saw you disappear into the role of caregiver, into the role of the person managing my decline. You were drowning, Clara, and I was drowning with you. I couldn't bear it anymore. I couldn't watch us both slowly disappear. This is insane. You're telling me you faked your death? You're telling me you switched your body with someone else's? Do you understand what you're saying? Do you understand what you've done? Yes, I understand. And I know you're angry. I know you have every right to be angry and hurt and confused. But I needed to do this. I needed you to think I was gone so that you could finally start living again. So that you could finally heal. So that you could finally stop drowning. I sat there on that bench and I cried. I cried because my husband was dead. Then I cried because my husband wasn't dead. Then I cried because I didn't know what to feel, what to believe, what was real anymore. Robert and I communicated secretly after that. His friend Thomas helped us arrange meetings. We met in hidden places. A coffee shop in Brooklyn where we didn't know anyone. A park bench in Manhattan where we could blend into the crowd of tourists and locals. A quiet corner of a library upstate where we could sit and talk without anyone paying attention to us. Each time I saw him, it was like meeting him for the first time again. But also like meeting him for the last time. The man who appeared before me wasn't the confused, frightened Alzheimer's patient I'd been caring for. This Robert was present, alive, and more himself than he'd been in years. His eyes were clear. He could form complete sentences. He could remember conversations we'd had days earlier. But I was also meeting someone I'd grieved for. Someone I'd said goodbye to. Someone whose body I'd helped prepare for burial. There was something fundamentally wrong about that. Something that violated every natural law I understood. How is this possible? I asked him during one of our first meetings, sitting on a bench overlooking the Hudson River. The disease, the decline, it was all real. It was all happening to you. I think the act of disappearing, of reinvention, of giving myself permission to be someone new, it freed something in me, he tried to explain. And I could hear him struggling to articulate something that defied articulation. The confusion is still there sometimes, Clara. I'm not miraculous. I still have moments when my memory fails me, when I can't find the right word, when I feel like I'm grasping at something just out of reach. But I'm not being consumed by it anymore. Maybe it was the escape I needed. Maybe it was psychological. Maybe the act of running away from that life, of becoming someone else, of shedding that identity. Maybe it gave me back the parts of myself that the disease was taking. But you lied to me. You lied to everyone. Yes, I did. And I'm sorry for that. But Clara, I was dying. The disease was killing me slowly, and watching it happen was killing you quickly. I couldn't let that continue. I didn't forgive him immediately. It took months for me to even begin to process what he'd done, why he'd done it, and what it meant for both of us going forward. But I also couldn't walk away from him. I couldn't pretend he was dead when I knew he wasn't. I couldn't erase the connection we'd built over 45 years just because he'd made an impossible choice. Robert couldn't return to his old life. The legal implications were staggering. He'd faked his own death. He'd manipulated hospital records, funeral arrangements, death certificates. He'd involved other people in criminal activity. If the truth came out, there would be consequences for him, for Thomas, for everyone involved. So instead, what he could do, what we could do, was build a new life together in secret. A second life. A hidden life. My friends think I'm handling my grief remarkably well. They comment on how I seem lighter, how I smile more, how I've started traveling again and making new plans. They attribute it to the natural healing process that comes with time. They suggest that grief has its seasons, and I've managed to move through mine with grace and dignity. They don't know that the reason I'm smiling is because I spend my evenings with my husband in a small apartment in New Jersey that no one knows about. They don't know that Robert is alive, that he's hiding from the world he used to know, that he's become someone new. Robert has changed his appearance. He grew a beard, something he never did in our 45 years of marriage. He changed his hair color from gray to a dark brown. He wears glasses he doesn't actually need, just to change the way his face looks. We call ourselves by different names in public. I'm Margaret now, and he's David. We've built an entirely new identity, a completely different life. It's strange and surreal and, in some ways, romantic in a way our marriage hadn't been in years. We're like teenagers again, sneaking around, keeping secrets, building a life that exists in shadows. But more importantly, Robert was right about one thing. I'm not drowning anymore. What I've learned from this experience is that sometimes love means letting go of what you think should happen and embracing what actually needs to happen. Sometimes it means making impossible choices. Sometimes it means living in secret rather than dying in plain sight. Robert didn't leave me that day. He saved me. And in saving me, he saved himself. I still teach occasionally, online classes from our hidden apartment. It allows me to do what I love without drawing attention to myself. Robert writes again, articles and essays under a pseudonym that never see his real name. His work appears in literary magazines and online publications under names that don't belong to him. But he's writing again, and that brings him joy. We travel carefully. We take trips to places where no one we know would go, where we're unlikely to run into anyone from our old lives. We've been to the Southwest, to small towns in Vermont, to beaches in South Carolina. We experience the world together again, which is something I thought we'd lost when the Alzheimer's diagnosis came. We hold hands walking through parks. We sit in cafes and watch people go by. We talk about our life together, about the past, about the future we're building now. We make love again, something I wasn't sure would ever happen after Robert's decline. It's different than it was before. Slower, more intentional, more grateful. But it's ours. What I didn't expect was how heavy the secret would become. I thought it would get easier with time, but it hasn't. If anything, it's gotten heavier. I ran into an old colleague at the grocery store last month. She asked me how I was doing, if I was managing okay. I told her I was fine, moving forward, adjusting to my new life. She told me she thought about Robert often, about what a good man he was. She told me she'd been to his funeral and it was the saddest day. She told me she was grateful to have known him. I stood there in the produce section, holding a bag of apples, and I felt like I was suffocating. I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to say, actually, my husband is alive. He's at home right now, reading a book and drinking coffee. He's very much alive, and I see him every day. But I couldn't say that. So I just thanked her for her kind words and finished my shopping. My son called me a few months ago. He said he'd been thinking about Dad a lot, that he missed him, that he wished he could have spent more time with him before he died. He said he regretted that the disease had taken his father away before his father actually died. He said he was working through his grief with a therapist and was grateful for the healing process. I listened to my son talk about his grief over his dead father, and I felt like a monster. I felt like I was lying to him, deceiving him, robbing him of the truth. But what truth? That his father faked his death? That his mother is complicit in a massive deception? That his inheritance, the house, the money, comes from an estate built on lies? I can't tell him. I can't tell anyone. There are nights when I wonder if I should turn us in. There are nights when I think about confessing everything, going to the police, explaining the situation, accepting whatever consequences come. Those nights are the hardest because I know that if I do that, I'll lose Robert again. Not to death, but to prison, to separation, to legal consequences that would tear our lives apart. So instead, I keep the secret. I keep it locked inside, where it grows and grows, until sometimes I feel like I'm going to explode from the weight of it. Robert tries to help. He tells me it's not my fault. He tells me I didn't make this choice. He did. He tells me I shouldn't carry the guilt. But I do carry it. I carry it every day. It's the price I pay for having my husband back, for having a second chance at a life with him. But here's the thing that I didn't expect. There's unexpected joy in this situation. There's a strange kind of happiness that comes from living outside the rules, outside society's expectations, outside the normal boundaries of what's allowed. We're free in a way we've never been before. Free from the expectations of Robert's career, from the social obligations of our old life, from the need to maintain appearances or keep up with friends, or participate in the rituals of normal society. We've stepped outside of all that, and in stepping outside, we found something we didn't know we were missing. We laugh together more than we did in our last 5 years of marriage. We talk about things we never talked about before. Not just surface conversations, but deep talks about what we believe, what we want, what matters. We make love with a tenderness and gratitude that we didn't have before. We travel without worrying about whether we can afford it, because we don't have the expenses of normal life. No mortgage, no property taxes, no social commitments that require spending. We live simply and cheaply, and we use what money we have to experience things. We've been to national parks. We've stayed in small towns. We've eaten in restaurants we never would have tried before. We've found freedom in this new life, and I don't know how to reconcile that with the guilt and the secrecy and the deception that's at the foundation of this freedom. If I'm honest, what Robert did, what we did together, taught me something about love that I'm still trying to understand. It taught me that real love sometimes means making impossible choices. It means stepping outside conventional morality when that's what compassion requires. It means being willing to break the rules if breaking the rules is what will save the person you love. I'm not saying that makes what we did right. I'm saying that life is more complicated than the simple rules we're taught. Sometimes the law is wrong. Sometimes society's expectations are destructive. Sometimes the only way to love someone properly is to betray everyone else's expectations of what that love should look like. Robert was dying. Not in the physical sense. His body was still functioning. But in every other sense, he was dying. And I was dying with him. The disease was killing us both. And so he made a choice that most people would call insane, immoral, illegal. He made a choice to save us both. And it worked. Now, a year after that funeral, after that impossible message at the cemetery, I've had time to process what happened. I've had time to accept it, to live with it, to build something from it. We've settled into our new life with a rhythm that feels almost normal, though nothing about this is normal. We wake up in our apartment in New Jersey. I make coffee while Robert reads. Not the newspaper anymore, but books. Endless books about everything. We eat breakfast together. We plan our day. Sometimes I go to the library to do online teaching. Sometimes Robert meets with Thomas to discuss things I don't ask about. Sometimes we just stay home together and be. The apartment is small but comfortable. We've decorated it slowly, carefully, without drawing attention to ourselves. We have photos on the walls, but not of us. Photos of places we've visited, paintings we like, images from our travels. We have Robert's books lining the shelves, organized by subject and color. We have a kitchen where we cook simple meals together. There's a rhythm to our days that I'd thought was lost forever. When Robert was sick, when the Alzheimer's was consuming him, I thought I'd never laugh again. I thought the part of my life that involved joy and lightness was over. But it wasn't. It was transformed, changed, complicated, but not over. Robert still has moments when his memory fails him. Sometimes he'll ask me the same question twice in one conversation. Sometimes he can't remember the name of a restaurant we went to last week. But it's manageable now. It's not the progressive deterioration it was before. It's just the normal memory loss that comes with aging. I asked him once if he thought the disease was actually gone, or if it was just arrested, frozen in place by the radical change he made. He said he didn't know. He said it might come back. He said he lives with the awareness that this could end at any moment, that the disease could suddenly progress again, that he could lose himself all over again. But he said it's worth it. He said even if he only gets 5 more years, 5 more months, 5 more days with his mind intact and his sense of self preserved, it's worth it. The hardest part is maintaining my old life while living this new one. I have to show up to events and act like a widow. I have to accept condolences that feel increasingly hollow as time passes. I have to maintain relationships with my children while keeping this massive secret from them. I have to pretend that my grief is something I'm healing from, when really my grief has been replaced by something far more complicated, joy mixed with guilt mixed with fear. My friend Margaret, one of my oldest friends from my teaching days, has tried to set me up on dates. She thinks I should move on, should find companionship with another man my age. She can't understand why I don't want to date, why I seem content to be alone. I have to smile and nod and make excuses. I can't tell her that I'm not alone. I can't tell her that I have a companion, a lover, a partner. I'm just hiding him from the world. There are social situations where it gets particularly difficult. When I'm with my children and their families, there's always someone talking about Robert, asking me how I'm handling his absence, suggesting that time heals all wounds. I have to bite my tongue. I have to pretend that what they're saying makes sense to me, when really I'm living a completely different reality. I think a lot about justice. Was it just to let the man whose body is buried in Robert's casket go unmourned? Was it just to deceive my children about their father's death? Was it just to involve Thomas in criminal activity? Was it just to destroy the birth certificates and death certificates and medical records, to create this web of lies that touches so many people? No, none of it was right. But I also think about whether it was just to let Robert slowly disappear into Alzheimer's while I watched helplessly, unable to do anything but ease his suffering at the margins. I think about whether it was just to force me to watch the man I loved become a stranger. I think about whether the disease itself was just, and of course it wasn't. So sometimes injustice is the only response to a world that's already unjust. We've been living this secret life for over a year now. And I've come to accept it. Not to be at peace with it. I don't know if I'll ever be truly at peace with it, but to accept it as the reality we're living. Robert has become David in our new community. He volunteers at a library in a nearby town. He helps people research local history. He talks to students about journalism, about the power of stories, about the importance of truth. It's ironic, I suppose. He's telling people about the importance of truth while living under a false identity. But maybe that's not ironic. Maybe that's the most honest thing he can do. I continue my online teaching. I've even started writing a little bit, essays about education, about aging, about what it means to live. I'm careful not to write about anything that could identify me or Robert, but I'm writing again, which I thought I'd stopped doing years ago. We've created a life that exists in the margins. We're ghosts in many ways, people who exist outside the normal structures of society. But we're also more alive than we've been in years. We're present with each other. We're engaged with the world. We're building something together. What I want people to understand, what I want to say to anyone listening to this story, is that love is complicated. Love doesn't always look like what we expect it to look like. Sometimes love means making choices that no one else would understand, that everyone else would judge, that go against everything society tells us we should do. Robert didn't abandon me. He saved me. He took an impossible situation and made an impossible choice, and it worked. Was it legal? No. Was it ethical by conventional standards? No, but was it love? Yes. It was the most profound act of love I've ever witnessed. I'm not telling this story because I think what we did was right. I'm telling it because I think it's true, and I think truth matters. I think our stories matter. I think the ways we love each other, even when those ways are messy and complicated and impossible, those matter too. I'm 72 years old, and I never thought I'd have another chapter to my life story. But I do, and Robert is in it. We're writing this chapter together, day by day, moment by moment, keeping the secret that binds us together. Looking back now, I can see that what happened wasn't just about saving me or Robert. It was about both of us making a choice to continue our story in a new way. It was about refusing to accept the ending that was being written for us by disease, by age, by circumstance. The world tells us that there are proper ways to end, ways that are dignified, accepted, understood by everyone around us. We're supposed to decline gracefully. We're supposed to fade away. We're supposed to accept our limitations and move into whatever comes next with grace and acceptance. But Robert refused that ending. And I supported his refusal. Together, we chose something else entirely. I don't know if that was brave or foolish. I don't know if future generations will look back on this and think we did something noble or something terrible. I only know that it was necessary for both of us. I only know that it saved our lives. That message Robert sent me at his funeral, I am alive. It wasn't just about his physical existence. It was a statement about choice. It was a statement about refusing to disappear, refusing to be defined by disease, refusing to let circumstance determine our story. I am alive, he said. And in saying that, he reminded me that I was alive too. That I didn't have to disappear along with him. That there was still life to be lived, still stories to tell, still moments to experience. For months after his death, his fake death, people kept telling me that I would adjust, that I would move on, that eventually the pain would fade and I'd remember the good times without the hurt. They meant well. They were trying to help. But what they didn't understand was that I had already adjusted. I'd already moved on. I was already living in a new reality. The only difference was that Robert was in it. This past year has been unlike any other year of my life. It's been a year of secrets and deceptions and impossible choices. It's been a year of fear. Fear of being discovered. Fear of losing Robert again. Fear of the consequences that could come if the truth comes out. But it's also been a year of unexpected joy. It's been a year of relearning my husband. It's been a year of building a new life on the rubble of an old one. It's been a year of experiencing love in its most essential, most stripped-down form. We don't have much. We have an apartment, each other, the ability to live quietly and carefully. We have our books and our conversations and our walks through parks where no one knows us. We have mornings spent drinking coffee together and evenings spent reading or talking. We have the knowledge that we're together, and that's enough. The price we pay is constant vigilance. It's the weight of the secret that never gets lighter. It's the relationships with my children that are built on a lie, even if it's a lie of omission. It's the knowledge that at any moment, this could all come crashing down. It's also the knowledge that I've participated in something deceptive, something that involved manipulating death itself, something that goes against every principle I was taught to believe in as a teacher and as a person. There are nights when I wonder if I should tell someone. My priest, perhaps, in a confession that could be confidential. My doctor, to get advice on how to handle the psychological weight of this secret. A lawyer, to understand what the legal implications really are. But I don't, because telling anyone would mean risking Robert. And I can't do that. I've already lost him once. I can't lose him again. We are living in the margins of society now. We are people who exist outside the normal structures, outside the documentation that proves existence in the modern world. Robert has no legal identity. He doesn't pay taxes or vote or own property in his own name. He lives as a ghost, present in the world but not officially part of it. I live between two worlds, the world where I'm Clara, the widow, the retired teacher, the woman grieving her husband of 45 years, and the world where I'm Margaret, the woman living with David, the man I love, building a life outside the law. It's disorienting sometimes. It's exhausting sometimes. But it's also liberating in ways I didn't expect. Here's what I want you to understand. What I need you to know after hearing this story. Life is not always simple. Love is not always straightforward. Sometimes the right thing to do and the legal thing to do are not the same thing. Robert made an impossible choice, and I supported that choice. We're living with the consequences of that choice every single day. We're living with the fear and the guilt and the weight of the secret. But we're also living. We're alive in ways that go beyond mere survival. We're present with each other. We're engaged with the world. We're building something together that's beautiful and broken and real. I don't know if this story will end well. I don't know if we'll live out the rest of our lives in peaceful obscurity, or if we'll be discovered and everything will come crashing down. I don't know what the future holds. But I know that for this moment, in this time, we are together. And that's everything. We are alive, both of us. Against all odds, against all logic, against everything the world tried to do to us, we are alive. And we are together. And that is the greatest love story I know how to tell.